Hello friends, this video is the introduction part of the book The Brief Answers to the Big Questions written by Professor Stephen Hawking. In the introduction part, first we are going to see Eddie Redmayne's thoughts on Professor Stephen Hawking. The first time I met Stephen Hawking, I was struck by his extraordinary power and his vulnerability. The determined look in his eyes coupled with the immovable body was familiar to me from my research. I had recently been engaged to play the role of Stephen Hawking in The Theory of Everything and had spent several months studying his work and the nature of his disability, attempting to understand how to use my body to express the passage of motor neuron disease over time. And yet, when I finally met Stephen Hawking, the icon, the scientist of phenomenal talent, whose main communication was through a computerized voice along with a pair of exceptionally expressive eyebrows, I was floored. I tend to get nervous in silence and talk too much, whereas Stephen absolutely understood the power of silence. The power of feeling like you are being scrutinized. Flustered, I chose to talk to him about how our birthdays were only days apart, putting us in the same zodiacal sign. After a few minutes, Stephen replied, "I'm an astronomer, not an astrologer." He also insisted that I can call him Stephen and stop referring to him as a professor. I had been told. The opportunity to portray Stephen was an extraordinary one. I was drawn to the role because of the duality of Stephen's external strength in his scientific work and the internal battle against the motor neuron disease starting in his early 20s. His was unique, complex and rich story of human endeavor, family life, huge academic achievement and sheer defiance in the face of all obstacles. While we wanted to portray the inspiration, we also wanted to show the grit and courage involved in Stephen's life displayed by both him and by those who cared for him. But it was equally important to portray that side of Stephen which has pure showman. In my trailer, I ended up having 3 images that I referred to. One was Einstein with his tongue out because there is that similar playful with Hawking. Another was the Joker in a pack of cards who's a puppeteer because I feel Stephen always had people in the palm of his hand. The third was James Dean, and that was what I gained from seeing him, the glint and the humor. The greatest pressure in playing a living person is that you will have to account for your performance to the person you have portrayed. In Stephen's case, the accounting was also to his family who had been so generous to me during my preparation for the film. Before Stephen went into the screening, he said to me, "I will tell you what I think, good or otherwise." I replied that if it was otherwise, perhaps he could just say otherwise and spare me the exhorting details. Generously, Stephen said he had enjoyed the film. He was moved by it, but famously he also stated that he thought there should have been more physics and fewer feelings. This is impossible to argue with. Since The Theory of Everything, I have stayed in contact with the Hawking family. I was touched to be asked to give a reading at Stephen's funeral. It was an incredibly sad but brilliant day, full of love and joyful memories and reflections on this most courageous of men who had led the world in his science and in his quest to have disabled people recognized and given proper opportunities to thrive. We have lost a truly beautiful mind, an astonishing scientist, and the funniest man I have ever had the pleasure to meet. But as his family said at the time of Stephen's death, His work and legacy will live on, and so it is with sadness but also a great pleasure that I introduce you to this collection of Stephen's writings on diverse and fascinating topics. I hope you enjoy his writings, and to quote Barack Obama, I hope Stephen Hawking is having fun up there among the stars. And from here, we are moving to the next part in the introduction where Professor Kip S. Thorne shares his thoughts on Professor Stephen Hawking. I first met Stephen Hawking in July 1965 in London, England, at a conference on general relativity and gravitation. Stephen was in the midst of his PhD studies at the University of Cambridge. I had just completed mine at Princeton University. Rumors swirled around the conference halls that Stephen has devised a compelling argument that our universe must have been born at some finite time in the past. It cannot be infinitely old. So, along with some 100 people, I squeezed into a room designed for 40 to hear Stephen speak. He walked with a cane and his speech was a bit slurred, but otherwise he showed only modest of signs of the motor neuron disease with which he had been diagnosed just 2 years earlier. His mind was clearly unaffected. His lucid reasoning relied on Einstein's general relativity questions and on astronomers' observations that our universe is expanding, and on a few simple assumptions that seemed very likely to be true. And it made use of some new mathematical techniques that Roger Penrose had recently devised, combining all these in the ways that were clear, powerful, and compelling. Stephen deduced his result. Our universe must have begun in some sort of singular state, roughly 10 billion years ago. I emerged from Stephen's 1965 lecture tremendously impressed, not just by his argument and conclusion, but more importantly by his insightfulness and creativity. So I sought him out and spent an hour talking privately with him. That was the beginning of a lifelong friendship, a friendship based on not just common science interest, but on a remarkable mutual sympathy and uncanny ability to understand each other as human beings. Soon we were spending more time talking about our lives, our loves, and even death than about science, though our science was still much of the glue that bound us together. In September 1973, I took Stephen and his wife Jane to Moscow, Russia. Despite the raging Cold War, I had been spending a month or so in Moscow every other year since 1968, collaborating on science with members of a group led by Yakov Borisovich. Zelzowitz was a superb astrophysicist and also a father of the Soviet hydrogen bomb. Because of his nuclear secrets, he was forbidden to travel to Western Europe or America. He craved discussions with Stephen. He could not come to Stephen, so we went to him. In Moscow, Stephen wowed Zelzowitz and hundreds of other scientists with his insightness, and in return, Stephen learned a thing or two from Zelzowitz. Most memorable was an afternoon that Stephen and I spent with Zelzowitz and his PhD student Alexei Starbonsky in Stephen's room in the Russia Hotel. Zelzowitz explained in initiative ways a remarkable discovery they had made, and Alexei explained it mathematically. To make a black hole spin requires energy. We already knew that a black hole, they explained, can use its spin energy to create particles, and the particles will fly away carrying the spin energy with them. This was new and surprising, but not terribly surprising. When an object has an energy of motion, nature usually finds a way to extract it. We already knew other ways of extracting a black hole's spin energy. This was just a new, though unexpected way. Now, The great value of conversations like this is that they can trigger new directions of thought. And so it was Stephen. He mulled over the Z-Zowit and Alexei discovery for several months, looking at it first from one direction and then from another, until one day it triggered a truly radical insight in Stephen's mind. After a black hole stops spinning, the hole can emit particles. It can radiate, and it radiates as though the black hole was hot like the sun, though not very hot, just mildly warm. The heavier the hole, the lower its temperature. A hole that weighs as much as the sun has a temperature of 0.00000006 Kelvin, 0.06 millionths of a degree above the absolute zero. The formula for calculating this temperature is now engraved on Stephen's headstone in Westminster Abbey in London, where his ashes reside between those of Isaac Newton and Charles Darwin. This Hawking temperature of a black hole and its Hawking radiation were truly radical, perhaps the most radical theoretical physics discovery in the second half of the 20th century. They opened our eyes to profound connections between general relativity, thermodynamics, and quantum physics. For example, they led Stephen to prove that a black hole has entropy, which means that somewhere inside or around the black hole there is enormous randomness. He deduced that the amount of entropy is proportional to the whole surface area. His formula for the entropy is engraved on Stephen's memorial stone, Gonville and Case College in Cambridge, where he worked. For the past 45 years, Stephen and hundreds of other physicists have struggled to understand the precise nature of a black hole's randomness. It is a question that keeps on generating new insights about the marriage of quantum theory with general relativity, that is, about the ill understood laws of quantum gravity. In autumn 1974, Stephen brought his PhD students and his family to Pasadena, California for a year so that he and his students could participate in the intellectual life of my university Caltech and merge temporarily with my own research group. It was a glorious year at the pinnacle of what came to be called the golden age of black hole research. During that year, Stephen and his students and some of mine struggled to understand black holes more deeply, as I did to some degree, but Stephen's presence and his leadership in our joint group's black hole research gave me freedom to pursue a new direction that I had been contemplating for some years: gravitational waves. There are only two types of gravitational waves that can travel across the universe, bringing us information about things far away: electromagnetic, which include light, X-rays, gamma rays, microwaves, radio waves, etc., and gravitational waves. Electromagnetic waves consist of oscillating electric and magnetic forces that travel at light speed. When they impinge on charged particles such as the electrons in a radio or TV antenna, they shake the particles back and forth, depositing in the particles the information they carry. That information can then be amplified and fed into a loudspeaker or onto a TV screen for humans to comprehend. If you like this video, please give a like, comment your thoughts on this video, and if you want to see more motivational videos and about more books, just subscribe to our channel Stories for the Quits. Keep supporting the channel and thanks for watching.